The cavernous hall glittered, a galaxy of crystal chandeliers and champagne flutes. But for Elena Vance, the air had suddenly become too thin to breathe. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the symphony orchestra's gentle swell. On the stage, bathed in a spotlight that seemed to steal all the oxygen in the room, stood a man she knew. And a man she didn't. She knew the gentle curve of his smile, the way his dark hair fell across his brow when he was lost in thought. She knew the warmth in his eyes when he looked at his children, a warmth that had, on a few cherished occasions, been directed at her. She knew him as Alex, a landscape architect, a widower, a kind and slightly awkward single father who was just trying to navigate the beautiful chaos of raising two 5-year-olds. But the man on the stage was not Alex, the landscape architect. The enormous screen behind him displayed a name in elegant, corporate font, Alexander Sterling. And below it, a title that made the blood drain from her face. CEO, Sterling Enterprises. The MC's voice boomed through the speakers, a distant, distorted sound. A man whose vision has not only reshaped our city's skyline, but also redefined corporate philanthropy. The brilliant mind behind the Sterling Legacy Foundation. Mr. Alexander Sterling. Polite, enthusiastic applause erupted around her. But Elena was frozen, a statue in a borrowed dress she had spent her last $100 on, hoping to make a good impression at her final round interview with this very company. An interview for her dream job. A job she now realized was in a company owned by the man who had bought her and his children ice cream just 2 days ago. The man for whom she had felt a spark, a genuine, terrifying flicker of hope after years of lonely struggle. The man who had, with a bashful smile, allowed her to pay for their coffee on their first date. A simple act of shared dignity she had cherished he had let her pay. A woman scraping by, offering her meager share to a billionaire. The thought wasn't just embarrassing, it was a profound, gut-wrenching violation. It recontextualized every shared glance, every soft-spoken word, every moment she had thought was a real connection. Was it all a game? A social experiment for a bored tycoon? A cruel joke? Her mind reeled, a chaotic slideshow of their time together. The park. The diner. His twins, Leo and Luna, holding her hands. He had told her he was struggling to find a work-life balance. A lie. He had told her he admired her resilience. A lie. It all felt like lies. But what no one in that glittering ballroom realized, not even the man on the stage who was just now scanning the crowd, his practiced corporate smile faltering slightly, was that this moment of public revelation was not just the end of a budding romance. It was the ignition point for a crisis that would threaten to burn down not just one man's empire, but the fragile futures of everyone he had ever claimed to care about. And for Elena, the woman who had just had her heart and her dignity shattered in front of hundreds of strangers, it was the moment she understood that the truth, no matter how painful, was a weapon she might have to learn to wield. To understand how a simple act of kindness in a sun-drenched park could spiral into a night of devastating truth, we must go back. Back to a Tuesday afternoon, 6 weeks earlier. Alexander Sterling lived his life behind glass. The floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office offered a panoramic view of the city he had helped build, yet he felt completely disconnected from the bustling life below. His days were a meticulously scheduled series of board meetings, financial forecasts, and strategic power plays. He was a king in a glass castle, and he had never felt more alone. His world had shrunk to this sterile opulence 5 years ago, on the day he lost his wife, Isabel, in a sudden, senseless car accident. She had been the life, the color, the chaos in his orderly world. Now, all that remained of her vibrant spirit were his children, 5-year-old twins, Leo and Luna. They were his reason for breathing, his only connection to the man he used to be. But he was failing them. He knew it with the kind of deep, aching certainty that settled in a parent's bones in the dead of night. Nannies and tutors raised them. His time with them was scheduled, sanitized, and supervised. He didn't know their friends' names or what monsters they imagined lived under their beds. He was their provider, their guardian. But he was ceasing to be their father. That Tuesday, a wave of self-loathing washed over him so intensely it nearly buckled his knees. He was staring at a quarterly report showing unprecedented profits. But All he could see was the ghost of Isabel's disappointed face. He stood up abruptly, startling his assistant. "Cancel the rest of my day," he said, his voice raw. "But sir, the meeting with the Tokyo investors, cancel it." He drove himself, a rare occurrence, to the one place he felt a sliver of peace. The public park near the neighborhood where he and Isabel had first lived. It was a place where he wasn't Mr. Sterling, the CEO. He was just a man with his children. Leo, quiet and observant like him, clutched a worn, one-eyed teddy bear named Barnaby. Luna, a whirlwind of energy with Isabel's bright, curious eyes, was already chasing a butterfly. For a while, it was almost normal. He pushed them on the swings, feeling the burn in his office soft muscles. He caught Luna at the bottom of the slide, her giggles a melody he hadn't realized how much he'd missed. But the ghost of his inadequacy followed him. He was clumsy, out of practice with the simple rhythms of play. And then it happened that a bigger kid, racing past, knocked Leo over. It wasn't malicious, just the careless energy of childhood. But Leo fell hard, and Barnaby, his treasured companion, flew from his grasp, landing in the middle of a large, muddy puddle. Leo's face crumpled. A silent, heartbreaking sob shook his small frame. It wasn't a tantrum. It was a quiet devastation that shattered Alexander's heart that he rushed to his son, but he didn't know what to do. The bear was ruined. He could buy 1,000 new bears, 1,000,000, but it wouldn't be Barnaby. He stood there, frozen by the sheer force of his own helplessness, a billionaire CEO utterly defeated by a muddy teddy bear. That's when he heard a voice, soft but firm. "Hey, little guy. It's okay. Let's see what we've got here." He looked up. A woman was kneeling beside Leo, her expression one of genuine, unhurried empathy. She had warm, kind eyes and a cascade of brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her clothes were simple, jeans and a faded t-shirt, but she radiated a calm competence that he, in his $1,000 suit, utterly lacked. This was Elena Vance. Elena had come to the park for a different reason, to escape the suffocating silence of her tiny apartment and the growing pile of rejection letters. Her life had been on hold for the past 3 years, caring for her mother through a long, draining illness. Her mom had passed 6 months ago, leaving Elena with a mountain of medical debt, a gaping hole in her heart, and a resume with a 3-year gap that was proving impossible to explain to potential employers. She was an architect by training, a good one, but her portfolio was gathering dust. Each rejection felt like a confirmation of her deepest fear, that she had sacrificed her future and was now being left behind by the world. The park was her sanctuary, a place where she could watch families and feel a part of something, even if only as an observer. When she saw the little boy fall, her instincts took over. She saw his silent tears, the way he looked at the muddy bear not as a toy, but as a fallen friend. And she saw the father, handsome and well-dressed, looking utterly lost. "Barnaby is very brave," she said to Leo, her voice gentle. "He just went for a little mud bath. It happens to the best of us." Leo looked at her, his tears slowing. Luna, ever curious, trotted over. "He's all yucky. Nothing a little first aid can't fix," Elena said with a smile. She reached into her worn tote bag and pulled out a water bottle and a small pack of tissues. She carefully, methodically, began cleaning the bear, narrating her actions like a field surgeon. "First, we irrigate the wound. Then we gently pat him dry. See? His eye is still there. He's a tough cookie." Alexander watched, mesmerized. She wasn't just cleaning a toy. She was validating his son's feelings. She was performing a small act of magic, transforming a moment of childhood tragedy into a lesson in care and resilience. In 5 minutes, she had connected with his children in a way he hadn't managed in 5 years. "There," she said, handing the damp but respectable-looking bear back to Leo. "He'll need to air dry, but he's going to make a full recovery." Leo hugged Barnaby tightly, then did something that stunned Alexander. He turned and gave Elena a shy, watery smile. "Thank you. You're very welcome," she replied, her own smile lighting up her face. It was a genuine, unguarded smile, and it struck Alexander with the force of a physical blow. He realized he hadn't seen a smile like that, one not meant for a camera or a business partner, in years that he finally found his voice. That was, "Thank you. I wasn't sure what to do." Elena finally looked at him, really looked at him and saw the exhaustion and sorrow hiding behind the expensive suit. He didn't look like a captain of industry. He looked like a man drowning. "It's just mud," she said softly. "Kids and mud are a classic combination. You must be Alex." She was guessing, trying to put a simple name to the face. He seized on it. A simple name. A simple identity. In that moment, he wanted nothing more than to be Alex, the dad in the park. Not Alexander Sterling, the CEO whose face was occasionally plastered on business magazines. Yes, Alex. And these are Leo and Luna. "I'm Elena," she said, standing and brushing the dirt from her knees. There was an awkward pause. He knew he should leave, get back to his sanitized life, but he couldn't. He was drawn to her quiet strength, her effortless warmth. He felt a desperate, selfish urge to keep her in his orbit, just for a little longer. I, I owe you," he stammered, feeling like a teenager. "For saving Barnaby. His tactical importance cannot be overstated." She laughed, a real, throaty laugh. "Well, I'm glad I could assist in the mission. A parent's gotta have backup." The word parent hung in the air. She saw him as an equal, another soldier in the trenches of parenthood. The anonymity was intoxicating. Can we buy you a coffee? Or an ice cream?" he asked, gesturing vaguely towards a small kiosk near the park entrance. "As a thank you from the entire battalion." Elena hesitated. Her budget was tight, but the loneliness was tighter. And there was something about this man, this Alex, and his two beautiful children that pulled at her. "Okay," she said. "Ice cream sounds great." As they walked, Luna, emboldened, slipped her hand into Elena's. Alexander's breath hitched. His daughter, who was shy with strangers, had instantly accepted this woman. They sat on a bench, the three of them sharing a simple moment of connection over melting ice cream cones. And for the first time in a very long time, Alexander felt a flicker of something he had thought was long dead: hope. He didn't know who she was, where she came from, or the struggles she faced. He only knew that for a few minutes, in the afternoon sun, she had made his broken little world feel whole. But what he also didn't know was that this woman, Elena Vance, was days away from submitting an application to the one place that would inextricably link her future with his hidden identity, setting them on a collision course with the truth. The first date was not a date. At least, that's what they both told themselves. Alexander, or rather, Alex, had called her 2 days after their park encounter, his voice surprisingly nervous over the phone. He'd used the excuse of the twins, saying they hadn't stopped talking about the nice lady who saved Barnaby. He'd suggested meeting at a small, unassuming diner, a place with sticky menus and crayons on the tables. "It's the only way I can guarantee a meal is actually eaten," he'd joked, a flimsy pretext for wanting to see her again. For Elena, the invitation was a terrifying thrill. Her friend, Sarah, had been ecstatic. A cute, single dad who's good with his kids. "It's a unicorn, Elena. Go." But Elena was more cautious. Hope was a dangerous thing. Still, she agreed. The loneliness was a heavier weight than the fear. She arrived at the corner booth diner to find them already there. Leo and Luna squished into one side of a red vinyl booth, looking at her with wide, expectant eyes. Alex stood as she approached, a gesture so formally polite it seemed out of place next to the ketchup-splattered salt shaker. He was dressed down, in a simple dark sweater and jeans, but he still wore them with an air of quiet expense. A detail Elena noticed but dismissed. Some people just had good taste. "Hi," she said, her smile feeling a little shaky. "Hi," he replied, his own smile genuine and relieved. "They insisted we get here early to secure the best booth." The evening unfolded with a surprising ease. The conversation wasn't about portfolios or career trajectories. It was about the vital, small-scale dramas of life. They talked about the best way to get gum out of hair, the philosophical differences between dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets and the regular kind, and the sheer exhaustion that came with loving small humans more than life itself. Elena found herself opening up in a way she hadn't in years. She spoke of her mother, not the illness, but her spirit, her love for gardening and bad television. She spoke of her dream of designing not just buildings, but community spaces, libraries, and parks that felt like home. She was careful not to mention her unemployment, the gnawing anxiety of her finances. She wanted, just for one night, to be a person with dreams, not problems. Alex, in turn, listened. He truly listened, his gaze focused, his questions thoughtful. He spoke of his own life with a carefully curated vagueness. He was a landscape architect, a profession he chose on the spot in the park because it sounded earthy and unassuming. It wasn't a total lie. His company had a massive landscape architecture division. He said his work was demanding, that he traveled a lot, which was why he struggled to be there for the kids. He spoke of his late wife, Isabel, with a quiet, profound grief that resonated with Elena's own loss. He described her as the architect of their family, the one who knew how to make a house a home. "I'm just trying to keep her plans from falling apart," he admitted, his voice low, looking at his children who were now happily coloring on their placemats. In that moment, Elena's heart ached for him. She saw a man trying his best, haunted by a love he'd lost, just like her. The wall she'd built around her heart developed a small, significant crack. When the check came, a modest $37, Elena reached for her purse instinctively. "Let me get this," she said. "Or at least my half." It was a matter of pride, of dignity. She wanted to be his equal in this, a partner in this small, shared experience. Alex looked surprised, then something unreadable flickered in his eyes. He started to protest. "No, please, I invited you. And I'm insisting," she said with a gentle but firm smile. "Teamwork, remember? Backup battalion." He hesitated for a long moment. Arthur, his old family butler and confidant, had once told him that people of character valued their dignity more than charity. Allowing her to pay her share was, in a strange way, a greater sign of respect than simply picking up the tab. It acknowledged her as a peer, not a project. So, against every instinct of the man who could buy the entire restaurant chain without noticing the expense, he relented. "Okay," he said softly. "Teamwork." He watched as she carefully counted out $20 from her wallet. He saw that there wasn't much left behind. The gesture, so small and yet so significant, lodged itself in his chest. This woman, who likely had so little, was offering to share her burden and her resources without a second thought. It was the most profound act of generosity he had experienced in years, and it was built on a foundation of his own deceit. The guilt was a sharp, bitter pill. As they left the diner, the cool night air a pleasant shock after the warmth inside. Luna yawned and stumbled. Without thinking, Elena scooped her up, her movements practiced and sure. Luna settled against her shoulder, instantly asleep. Leo, seeing this, shyly reached for Alex's hand on one side, and then, after a moment's hesitation, reached his other hand out for Elena's. And so they walked to her bus stop, a strange, temporary family silhouetted against the streetlights. A billionaire CEO, a struggling architect, and two motherless children, all of them pretending to be something they weren't, and yet, in that moment, creating something achingly real. "I had a really nice time, Alex," Elena said as her bus approached, carefully handing the sleeping Luna back to him. "Me too," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. We should do this again. I'd like that." As she boarded the bus and found a seat, she looked out the window. He was standing there, a sleeping child on his shoulder, another holding his hand, watching until the bus turned the corner. A perfect picture of a devoted, down-to-earth father. She smiled to herself, a warmth spreading through her chest. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a terrifying void. It felt like a possibility. She had no idea that the man she was falling for was not only the CEO of Sterling Enterprises, but that his company was on the verge of announcing a major new community project, a state-of-the-art library and park complex. The very kind of project she had described as her life's dream. A project for which the lead architect position was about to open up. The weeks that followed were a blur of stolen moments and deepening connections. They met in parks, at cheap matinee movies where the kids could whisper, at a local street fair, where Luna got her face painted like a tiger and Leo won a goldfish that was doomed to live for 3 days. Each meeting was carefully curated by Alexander to exist outside his real life. He used burner phones, paid for everything in cash heat, had his assistant withdraw, and invented a dizzying array of excuses for his work trips and demanding clients. The deception gnawed at him. He was living a double life, and the strain was beginning to show. His longtime confidant, Arthur Penhaligon, A man who had served the Sterling family since Alexander was a boy saw it clearly. This is unwise, sir, Arthur said one evening as Alexander was changing out of his bespoke suit and into the Alex uniform of jeans and a Henley shirt. She's different, Arthur, Alexander replied, his voice defensive. I have no doubt of that, sir. Which is precisely why she deserves the truth, Arthur countered, his tone gentle but firm. You are building a foundation on sand. When the tide comes in, and it always does, everything will wash away. And what is the truth, Arthur? That I'm the man who lives in this museum? Alexander gestured around the cavernous, sterilely perfect master suite. That my children are being raised by staff because their father is better at reading a balance sheet than a bedtime story? The man she's getting to know, the one who panics over muddy teddy bears, that's more real than the CEO. Is it? Arthur asked quietly. Or is it simply a holiday from yourself? A man's character is not defined by his circumstances, but by his choices. You are choosing to deceive a good woman. The words stung because they were true. With every lie, the hole he was digging grew deeper. He wanted to tell her. He rehearsed the conversation in his mind 100 times. Elena, there's something I need to tell you. My name isn't just Alex. I own a company. But how could he say it? How could he explain that their simple, beautiful connection was born from a lie without shattering it completely? The timing was never right. The fear of seeing that warm, trusting look in her eyes curdle into disgust and betrayal was paralyzing. Meanwhile, in Elena's world, a fragile seed of hope had begun to sprout. After months of rejections, she finally got a call. It was from the HR department at Sterling Enterprises. Her application, the one she'd sent off weeks ago with little expectation, had been flagged. They wanted to interview her for a junior architect position on a new, unannounced community outreach project. She was ecstatic. She told Alex about it on their next outing, a picnic by the lake. They sat on a checkered blanket while the twins chased ducks. You won't believe it, Alex. Sterling Enterprises. It's the biggest firm in the city, but they're also known for their foundation work. They're building a new public library and cultural center. It's exactly the kind of work I've always dreamed of doing. Her face was alive with passion, her eyes sparkling. Alexander felt a cold dread, mixed with a surge of pride. Of course they'd flagged her application. Her portfolio, which he'd never seen, must be brilliant. She was perfect for the project he had personally championed in Isabel's memory. That's incredible, Elena, he managed to say, his voice strained. I know it's a long shot, she continued, misinterpreting his tone as doubt. I'm probably up against people with much more recent experience. But I have to try. The final interview is in a few weeks. They're even having a big charity gala to announce the project, and the top candidates get invited. Can you imagine? He could imagine it all too well. He was the one giving the keynote speech at that gala. The walls were closing in. He had to tell her. He had to tell her now. He opened his mouth to speak, but just then, Leo, running back towards them, tripped and fell, scraping his knee. Elena was on her feet in an instant, all her attention focused on the crying child. She pulled a first aid kit from her magical tote bag, the same bag that had saved Barnaby, and expertly cleaned and bandaged the small wound, her voice a soothing murmur. Alexander watched, his heart a tangled mess of love and shame. This was who she was. She was a healer, a builder, and he was a coward, hiding behind a mask. The moment passed. He told himself he'd tell her tomorrow, or the day after. He'd find the perfect time, but the world does not wait for the perfect time. Parallel to this unfolding personal drama, a corporate storm was brewing. Marcus Thorne, the ruthless CEO of a rival development firm, Thorne Realty, had his sights set on a hostile takeover of Sterling Enterprises. Marcus and Alexander had a bitter history, a rivalry that began with their fathers and had only intensified over the years. Marcus saw Sterling Enterprises not just as a prize, but as a conquest. He had found a weakness, a chink in the Sterling armor. Alexander, in his grief, had poured an enormous amount of company resources into the Sterling Legacy Foundation, funding passion projects that Isabel had started, community gardens, art programs for underprivileged youth, and now, the massive library project. From a purely financial standpoint, these ventures looked like a drain on profits. Marcus began quietly spreading rumors among investors and board members that Alexander's sentimentality was making the company vulnerable. What Alexander didn't know was that Marcus had a source on the inside. A disgruntled board member, Richard Davenport, a man who felt overlooked by Alexander for a key promotion, was feeding Marcus sensitive information. Richard saw Alexander's focus on the foundation as a sign of weakness, a departure from the cutthroat business practices of Alexander's father. He's distracted, Richard told Marcus over a clandestine lunch. He's spending more time on this ridiculous library project than on our Q4 projections. The gala is his pet project. He's sinking millions into it. If we time this right, we can paint a picture of gross mismanagement, rattle the shareholders, trigger a sell-off, and you can sweep in. Marcus smiled, a predator sensing blood in the water. The gala, you say? Perfect. Nothing like a public spectacle to mask a private execution. The plan was set. Marcus would wait for the gala, the night of Alexander's greatest philanthropic triumph, and use the information from Richard to launch his attack, sending the stock into a tailspin and initiating the takeover. The very event that was destined to expose Alexander's lie to Elena was also marked to be the beginning of his professional ruin. He was walking into an ambush from two directions, completely unaware that the woman he was falling in love with and the man who wanted to destroy him were both closing in on the same night. Elena passed the first and second rounds of interviews with flying colors. Her passion was palpable, her ideas for the community library project fresh and innovative. The interviewers were impressed not just by her old portfolio, but by the quiet confidence and resilience she exuded. She spoke of architecture not as a construction of buildings, but as the creation of belonging. She told Alex everything, her voice buzzing with an excitement he hadn't heard before. She was coming alive, shedding the skin of her grief and uncertainty. And with every step she took towards her dream job, she took a step closer to his secret. They invited me, Alex. They actually invited me to the gala, she exclaimed over the phone one night. She had splurged on the dress, a simple but elegant deep blue gown, telling herself it was an investment in her future. Elena, that's wonderful, Alexander said, his stomach twisting into a knot. The gala was in 3 days. Time had run out. I'm so nervous, she confessed. I'll be in a room full of the most powerful people in the city. What do I even say to them? Just be yourself, he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. That's more than enough. He hung up the phone and stared at his reflection in the dark glass of his penthouse window. Arthur's words echoed in his ears. A foundation. On sand. The tide was no longer coming in. It was a tsunami, and he was standing on the beach, watching it approach, paralyzed by his own cowardice. He had to choose. Tell her now, over the phone, and risk shattering everything before she even had her moment to shine. Or let her go to the gala. Let her have her night of hope, and face the cataclysmic fallout when she inevitably saw him on that stage. He chose the coward's path. He chose silence, fooling himself into thinking he was protecting her, when in reality, he was only protecting himself from the pain of the confession. He told himself he would find her at the gala, pull her aside, and explain everything before the big announcement. It was a flimsy, desperate plan, and deep down, he knew it would fail. The night of the gala arrived, a symphony of flashing camera bulbs and expensive perfume. Elena felt like an imposter in her elegant dress, a Cinderella who knew the clock was ticking. She clutched her small purse, her palms sweating, and scanned the glittering crowd for a friendly face, but she knew no one. She found a quiet corner near a towering floral arrangement, sipping her complimentary water and trying to look like she belonged. She sent a quick text to Alex. Here we go. Feeling like a fish out of water. Wish you were here, across the city. In his mansion, Alexander read the text, his heart constricting. I am here, he thought, and I'm about to ruin everything. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, the very image of the powerful CEO he was. The twins were with Arthur, blissfully unaware of the drama about to unfold. You'll be amazing, he texted back, the lie feeling heavier than ever. Knock him dead. He arrived at the gala through a private entrance, bypassing the red carpet, and was immediately swept into a whirlwind of handshakes and hollow pleasantries. He searched the crowd for her, a frantic, desperate scan, but the ballroom was a sea of hundreds of faces. He was pulled aside by board members, by the mayor, by journalists. Every second that passed was a second closer to the moment of detonation. The lights began to dim. The MC was walking to the podium. It was starting. Alexander felt a surge of panic. He hadn't found her. From her corner, Elena watched, her heart thumping with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. The project she had poured her heart and soul into preparing for was about to be officially unveiled. This was the moment that could change her life. And now, the MC's voice echoed, rich and resonant. It is my distinct honor to introduce the visionary leader whose commitment to building a better city is matched only by his business acumen. A man who believes that a company's true worth is measured not just in profits, but in its contribution to the human spirit. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm welcome to the CEO of Sterling Enterprises, Mr. Alexander Sterling. Time seemed to slow down. Elena watched as a figure detached from the shadows at the side of the stage and walked into the single, brilliant spotlight. He looked different in a tuxedo, more formidable, more polished. But it was him. There was no doubt. The way he moved, the set of his jaw, the dark hair falling across his brow. It was Alex. Her Alex. The landscape architect. The single dad from the park. The name on the screen, Alexander Sterling, slammed into her with the force of a physical impact. CEO. The pieces of the puzzle, pieces she hadn't even realized were there, clicked into place with sickening clarity. His vague talk about demanding work, his always paying in cash, the expensive, understated quality of his casual clothes, his perfect, formal politeness. It wasn't charm, it was training. The applause around her was deafening, but all she could hear was the rushing of blood in her ears. Every memory, every shared moment, was instantly recast in the harsh, unforgiving light of this new reality. The diner, her offering to pay, her $20 bill, a pittance she had offered to a man who measured his worth in billions. The shame was a hot, suffocating wave. She felt her cheeks burn, her eyes sting. He wasn't a fellow traveler in the world of struggle. He was an observer from another planet, looking at her life as a curiosity. She wasn't a potential partner. She was a diversion, a research project, a little story he could tell his wealthy friends about the time he pretended to be a normal person. On stage, Alexander gripped the podium, his knuckles white. His eyes, finally adjusting to the light, scanned the crowd again, a desperate, last-ditch search. And then he saw her, standing in the back, half hidden by the flowers, her face a pale mask of shock and betrayal. Their eyes met across the vast, glittering expanse. In that single, shattering glance, he saw his entire deception crumble to dust. He saw the trust he had so carefully cultivated evaporate. He saw the beautiful, fragile thing they had built turn to ash. Elena held his gaze for a heartbeat, her expression unreadable, a vortex of pain and accusation. Then, without a sound, she turned and walked away, melting back into the shadows and heading for the exit. She didn't run. Her movements were deliberate, dignified, the walk of a woman who had just had her heart broken and her hope stolen, but refused to give her destroyer the satisfaction of seeing her fall apart. Alexander watched her go, a chasm opening in his chest. The carefully prepared speech was on the teleprompter in front of him, but the words were meaningless symbols. He wanted to shout her name, to stop the proceedings, to run after her. But he was trapped by the spotlight, by the expectant faces of hundreds of people, by the very life he had lied to escape. He opened his mouth, and the voice of Alexander Sterling, CEO, came out, smooth and practiced. But inside, the world of Alex, the dad from the park, had just ended. And as he spoke of building communities and fostering connection, he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he had just irrevocably destroyed the most genuine connection he had ever known. The tide had come in, just as Arthur had warned, and it had washed everything away. The applause that followed his speech was a roar, but Alexander barely heard it. He walked off the stage in a daze, his mind a maelstrom of regret. He had to find her. He had to explain. He pushed past a throng of well-wishers, his thank yous and wonderful speech, Alex becoming a meaningless drone. He made it to the main lobby, his eyes scanning frantically. But she was gone, vanished into the city night like a ghost. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. It was her. The message was short, brutal, and to the point that I hope the research for your little social experiment was fruitful. Delete my number. Each word was a shard of ice in his heart. Social experiment. That's what she thought this was. A cruel game. He tried to call the number, but it went straight to a disconnected message. She had already changed it or blocked him. He felt a wave of helpless fury, directed entirely at himself. Arthur was right. He had built a palace on sand, and now he was sinking in it, that he was about to race out of the building when his own phone rang. It was his head of security. "Sir, you need to see this." He was led to a small side office where a television was tuned to a financial news network. The headline scrolling across the bottom of the screen made his blood run cold. Sterling Enterprises stock plummets amid rumors of financial mismanagement. Hostile takeover imminent. The reporter on screen was speaking in urgent tones. "We're getting reports from multiple sources, confirmed by leaked internal documents, that Sterling Enterprises has funneled an exorbitant amount of capital into its nonprofit foundation, specifically for the new library project announced tonight. While philanthropic on the surface, analysts are calling it a reckless vanity project that has left the company dangerously exposed." Rival developer Marcus Thorne of Thorne Realty is rumored to be preparing an immediate and aggressive takeover bid. The leaked documents. Richard Davenport. It all clicked into place. The gala wasn't just the backdrop for his personal catastrophe. It was the stage for his professional execution. Marcus had timed his attack perfectly, using Alexander's tribute to his late wife as the very weapon to destroy her legacy and his company. He was being attacked on all fronts, his personal and professional worlds collapsing in perfect, terrible synchrony. Meanwhile, Elena was on a bus, the glittering lights of the city blurring through her tear-filled eyes. The shame and humiliation were a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. It wasn't just the lie, it was the depth of it. It was the memory of her offering him $20. The memory of her pouring out her dreams to him, dreams of working for his company, while he listened, knowing everything. She felt like a fool, a naive, trusting fool. The hope she had allowed herself to feel now seemed like a cruel joke. She got off the bus a few blocks from her apartment, walking numbly through the quiet streets. She just wanted to get home, lock the door, and let the world disappear. She fumbled for her keys. Her hand brushed against a folded piece of paper in her purse. It was a printout she'd been given during her final interview, a detailed architectural site plan for the library project. She'd been so excited, she'd carried it with her for good luck. Now, the sight of the Sterling Enterprises logo at the bottom made her feel sick. She was about to crumple it up and throw it away, but something stopped her. Tucked into the fold of the large blueprint was a smaller document she hadn't noticed before, clearly stapled to it by mistake. It looked like an internal memo, a budget addendum. Her eyes scanned the page. It detailed a series of phased land acquisitions adjacent to the library plot, coded under a project name, Isabel's Haven. The memo, signed by Richard Davenport, was recommending the immediate cancellation of these acquisitions, citing them as non-essential, high-cost liabilities. Elena frowned. It seemed odd. During her interview, the planning committee had spoken passionately about creating a holistic community space, a green belt connecting the library to a nearby low-income neighborhood. These land acquisitions seemed essential to that vision. Canceling them would effectively isolate the grand new library, turning it into a monument rather than an integrated community hub. Why would a board member recommend gutting the very soul of the project? Then she saw the date on the memo. It was from 2 days ago, and there was a handwritten note in the margin. MT confirms this is the leverage point. Proceed. MT. The letters meant nothing to her, until a fragment of a news report she'd half heard on a television in a bodega earlier that week surfaced in her memory. Something about a corporate raider. Marcus Thorne. MTA cold realization washed over her, cutting through her personal pain. This wasn't just a budget memo. This looked like evidence. Evidence that someone on the inside, Richard Davenport, was sabotaging the project in coordination with Marcus Thorne. The leverage point wasn't about saving the company money. It was about making it look bad, making Alexander Sterling look incompetent and sentimental. They were using his love for his late wife as a weapon against him. Elena stood on her doorstep, the cold metal of her keys in one hand and the damning piece of paper in the other. Her world had just been shattered by Alexander Sterling's deception. He had hurt her, humiliated her, treated her like a fool. Her every instinct screamed at her to rip up the memo, walk inside, and let him burn. Let his glittering empire fall. He deserved it. It was justice. What would anyone do in this moment? Holding the key to the fate of the person who just broke their heart? But then she thought of Leo and Luna. She thought of the raw, honest grief in Alexander's voice when he spoke of his wife, Isabel. She thought of the project itself, the library, the community space, the dream she had shared. Was she willing to let that die, to let a man like Marcus Thorne win, just despite the man who had lied to her? Her own pain was a roaring inferno, but beneath it, her integrity was a bedrock. She had spent the last 3 years of her life sacrificing for someone she loved. Her character wasn't defined by her circumstances, but by her choices. The irony was not lost on her. She was facing the very same test Alexander had failed. With a deep, shuddering breath, she made a choice. She turned away from her apartment door and started walking back towards the bus stop, the memo clutched in her hand like a lifeline. She didn't know what she was going to do or how she was going to do it. She only knew she couldn't let a lie, even one that had wounded her so deeply, be the reason the truth was buried forever. She was going back to face the man who had broken her world, not to save him, but to save something bigger than both of them. The emergency board meeting was convened for 8 a.m. the next morning. It was a bloodbath. The room, usually a bastion of calm, collected power on the 50th floor, was crackling with tension and barely concealed panic. Share prices were in freefall on the overseas markets. Marcus Thorne had already issued a public statement expressing his deep concern for the stability of Sterling Enterprises, a thinly veiled prelude to his takeover bid. Alexander stood at the head of the long mahogany table, looking as though he hadn't slept in a week. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed, but his voice was cold and steady. He was no longer the conflicted Alex. He was Alexander Sterling, the CEO, fighting for the life of his company and his wife's legacy. Richard Davenport sat near the middle of the table, the picture of sober concern. He was the one leading the charge, armed with spreadsheets and charts that painted a grim picture. With all due respect, Alexander, Richard began, his tone dripping with false sincerity. This is the result of emotional, not fiscal, leadership. The Isabel Sterling Library is a noble sentiment, but you've mortgaged the company's future. For it, the market has lost confidence. We need to cut our losses, cancel the project, and issue a statement reassuring our shareholders. Several other board members murmured in agreement. They were scared. They saw their fortunes dwindling. Canceling the project is not an option, Alexander stated, his voice like flint. The foundation is the heart of this company. It was my wife's vision, and it is our future. Your wife is gone, Alexander. Richard snapped, his composure finally cracking. And she's taking this company with her. We need to oust him as CEO before Thorne acquires us for pennies on the dollar. The room erupted. Shouts of "Order!" and "He's right!" echoed off the glass walls. Alexander was losing control. His defense of the foundation sounded exactly like what Marcus and Richard wanted it to sound like, the emotional rambling of a man unfit to lead. He had no concrete proof of their conspiracy, only a gut feeling and the bitter taste of betrayal that it was at that precise moment that the heavy doors to the boardroom swung open. Everyone turned. Standing in the doorway was Elena Vance. She looked small and out of place in her simple clothes from the day before, her face pale, but her eyes blazing with a fierce, determined light. She held a folded piece of paper in her hand. Alexander stared at her, his heart stopping. Of all the scenarios he had imagined, this was not one of them. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Elena said, her voice clear and steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside her. "But I believe this belongs to you." She walked forward, not looking at Alexander, but keeping her eyes locked on Richard Davenport. The change in Richard's expression was instantaneous and profound. His mask of concern dissolved, replaced by a flicker of pure, unadulterated panic. Elena placed the memo on the polished table in front of Alexander. "I believe I was given this by mistake during my final interview process," she said, her voice resonating in the stunned silence. "It appears to be a budget addendum for the library project. I found the handwritten note in the margin particularly illuminating." Alexander picked up the paper. He read the memo, saw the recommendation to cancel the Isabel's Haven land acquisitions, and then he saw the note. MT confirms this is the leverage point. Proceed. The final piece of the puzzle slammed into place. It was the proof. The smoking gun. He looked up from the paper, his gaze shifting from the memo to Elena's resolute face, and finally to Richard Davenport, whose face had gone ashen. Richard, Alexander said, his voice dangerously quiet. Who is MT? Richard stammered. I have no idea what that is. That document could have come from anywhere. She could have written that note herself. She's probably working for Thorne. Elena didn't flinch. I'm an architect, she said, addressing the entire room. My dream was to work on this project because I believe in building communities. That memo isn't about saving money. It's about sabotage. Canceling those acquisitions would strategically devalue the entire project, turning a community hub into an isolated monument, making it look exactly like the vanity project the news is calling it. She paused, letting her words sink in. It's a brilliant, cynical piece of corporate theater, and I imagine Marcus Thorne is waiting for his curtain call. The mood in the room shifted. The other board members looked from the memo to Richard's panicked face, and the truth began to dawn on them. They had been played. Alexander felt a surge of adrenaline. Elena had just handed him the sword he needed to win the war. He could have used it to simply save his company, to expose Richard and move on. But looking at her, standing there with so much courage after he had hurt her so profoundly, he knew that wasn't enough. This wasn't just about his company anymore. It was about his honor. He didn't just expose Richard. He confessed. She's right, Alexander said, his voice raw with an emotion no one in that room had ever heard from him before. This project, it has been driven by emotion. It is a tribute to my wife. Richard and Marcus Thorne tried to use that love, my love for my wife, as a weapon to destroy me. They assumed it was my weakness. He looked directly at Elena, his eyes filled with a universe of regret. But what they, and perhaps all of you, failed to understand is that it's my greatest strength. He turned his gaze back to the board. I will not be canceling this project. I will be doubling our investment. And as for Mr. Davenport, he let the silence hang in the air. Security will escort you from the building. We will be pursuing full legal action for corporate espionage and conspiracy. Richard Davenport, defeated and exposed, slumped in his chair as security guards entered the room. The confrontation was over. The company was safe. But the most important battle was yet to be fought. As the board members began talking excitedly, their panic replaced by a renewed loyalty, Alexander only had eyes for Elena. She was already backing towards the door, her part in the drama finished. She had done the right thing, and now she was trying to disappear again. Elena, wait, he called out, his voice cracking. She paused at the door, her back to him. He walked towards her, oblivious to the stares of his board members. He stopped a few feet behind her. Why? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. After what I did, why would you help me? She turned to face him, and for the first time, he saw the full depth of her pain in her eyes. It was still there, a raw, open wound. I didn't do it for you, Alexander, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I did it for Isabel's Haven. I did it for the kids who deserve that library. I did it because I spent the last 3 years of my life watching my mother fight with integrity, and I refuse to let a man like Marcus Thorne teach me that it doesn't matter. She took a breath. Your lies hurt me more than I can possibly say, but I won't let your actions dictate mine. That's a price I'm not willing to pay. With that, she turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving Alexander standing in the wreckage of his own making, finally understanding the vast, humbling difference between wealth and worth. He had won back his company, but he had lost the one person who had shown him what it meant to be truly rich. The days following the climactic board meeting were a whirlwind of damage control and strategic rebuilding for Alexander. The story of Richard Davenport's betrayal and Marcus Thorne's failed coup became the stuff of corporate legend. Sterling Enterprises' stock not only recovered but soared, buoyed by the narrative of a loyal CEO defending his wife's legacy. Against corporate vultures, Alexander was hailed as a hero in the press, a visionary leader with a heart. But the victory felt hollow, the praise like a foreign language. Every headline, every congratulatory call, only served to remind him of the woman who had made it all possible, and the chasm that now separated them. He had her address from the HR files. but he knew showing up at her door in a chauffeured car would be the worst possible thing he could do. Grand gestures of wealth were the problem, not the solution. He had to earn the right to even speak to her again, and he had no idea how. He started by making a public statement. At a press conference, he didn't just announce the full funding and expansion of the library project. He renamed it. It will no longer be called the Isabel Sterling Library, he said, his voice steady. My wife believed in community, not monuments. The project will henceforth be known as the Haven Community Center. It belongs to the city. Then, he did something that stunned the business world. He announced the creation of an independent ethics oversight committee for the Sterling Legacy Foundation, with a mandate to ensure its projects were always driven by community need, not corporate vanity. And he announced that the search for the project's lead architect would be reopened, overseen by this new committee, to ensure absolute transparency. He was publicly dismantling the very power structures that had enabled his deception. Elena saw the press conference on the news in her small apartment. She watched as he spoke, not with the slick polish of a CEO, but with a new, somber humility. She saw him trying. But trust, once shattered, is not so easily glued back together. She had done her part, and now she was trying to move on. She started applying for other jobs, trying to forget the dream that had almost come true. The silence from him was both a relief and a dull, persistent ache that a week later, a simple, hand-delivered envelope arrived for her. There was no corporate logo, just her name written in familiar handwriting. Inside was not a letter of apology or a job offer. It was a single, crisp photograph. A photo of a muddy, one-eyed teddy bear sitting on a shelf next to a picture of a smiling woman with bright, curious eyes, Isabel. On the back of the photo, in the same handwriting, were 5 words. He asked me to try. Elena stared at the photo, her throat tight. He asked me to try. It wasn't a justification. It was a confession of his inadequacy, his grief, his fear. He was telling her that his lie hadn't started with her. It had started with himself. It was the first thing he had said that felt completely, painfully true. Still, she did not respond. Alexander, meanwhile, was undertaking a quiet revolution in his own life. He started coming home early. He fired the head nanny and took over the bedtime routine himself. He learned about the monsters under Leo's bed and the secret dreams Luna whispered to her dolls. He read them bedtime stories, his voice often clumsy and unsure, but it was his voice. He took them to the park himself, not as a scheduled outing, but just because the sun was shining. He was learning, slowly and painfully, to be a father again. One Saturday afternoon, he was at that same park, pushing the twins on the swings, when he saw her. Elena was sitting on a bench across the green, sketching in a notepad. She wasn't looking their way. She was just there, in her sanctuary, his heart hammered in his chest. This was it. No grand gestures. No excuses. Just the truth. He told the kids to keep playing where he could see them and walked towards her, his steps heavy with the weight of all his unspoken words. She looked up as his shadow fell over her sketchbook. Her expression was guarded, her eyes wary. Elena, he said, his voice quiet. He didn't sit down, just stood before her, offering her the space to flee. Alexander, she replied, her tone neutral. I know I have no right to ask you for anything, he began, his words coming out in a rush before he could lose his nerve. Not for forgiveness, not for a second chance. I need you to know the truth. Not the excuses, the truth. He told her everything. He told her about Isabel, about the crushing weight of her absence, about the glass castle he had built around himself. He told her how he felt like a ghost in his own children's lives. When I met you in this park, he said, his voice thick with emotion, it was the first time in 5 years I felt like a real person. Not a CEO, not a widower. Just a man. A father. And I was so terrified of losing that, of you seeing the broken, empty man in the suit, that I clung to the lie. It was selfish, and it was cowardly, and it was wrong. I wasn't trying to trick you, Elena. I was trying to hide from myself. He finally looked her in the eyes. I didn't fall for you because you were a curiosity. I fell for you because you were real. You were kind and strong, and you saw a little boy's broken heart over a muddy bear, and you knew how to fix it. You showed my children a warmth I had forgotten how to give. You showed me a warmth I thought I would never feel again. And I destroyed it because I was a coward. Tears were streaming down his face now, unchecked. He didn't bother to wipe them away. This was his penance, his truth. Elena listened, her own eyes shimmering. She saw not the billionaire, but the broken man he had described. She saw the father who loved his children so desperately, but didn't know how to show it. The wall around her heart, already cracked by his photograph, began to crumble. "I believe you," she said softly. The words were a balm on his raw soul. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding for weeks. "The Haven Project," he continued, taking a step back, changing the subject, giving her an out. "The Ethics Committee has officially offered the lead architect position to 3 final candidates. They are required to make a public presentation to a community board next week. Your name is at the top of the list, if you still want it." He was offering her the dream, but with no strings attached. It was a professional opportunity, clean and separate from their personal wreckage. Elena looked from his tear-streaked face to his children playing in the distance. She thought of the life she wanted, the work she wanted to do. And she thought of the man standing before her, stripped of all his pretense. He had lied, yes, but his heart, she now realized, had been telling the truth all along. "I'll have to check my schedule," she said, a tiny, watery smile playing on her lips. A week later, Elena stood not in a glittering ballroom, but in a humble community hall, presenting her vision for the Haven Community Center to a board of local residents, teachers, and shopkeepers. Her presentation was brilliant, filled with passion and a deep understanding of what the neighborhood truly needed. Alexander was there, sitting in the back row, not as a CEO, but as a member of the community. He watched her, his heart swelling, with a pride that was pure and uncomplicated. When she finished, the hall erupted in spontaneous, heartfelt applause. The job was hers. It was earned. Afterward, he waited for her outside. "You were incredible," he said. "Thank you," she replied, her smile genuine and bright. "It's a good project. It has a good soul." They stood in a comfortable silence for a moment. The past was between them, a scar, but it was no longer a gaping wound. "So," he said, taking a leap of faith, "I know this amazing little diner. Their chicken nuggets are shaped like dinosaurs. I was wondering if the lead architect of the city's most important new project might be free for dinner. Might treat this time, and I promise I can afford it." Elena laughed, a real, joyful sound that echoed in the evening air. "I think," she said, her eyes sparkling, "I'd like that very much." The story of Alexander and Elena didn't have a fairy tale ending because their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was something better. It was real. They didn't move into his mansion. Instead, they found a new house, somewhere in between his world and hers, with a big, messy garden and enough room for 2 growing children and an architect's drafting table. Alexander didn't stop being a CEO, but he was a different kind of leader. He championed work-life balance, not as a corporate buzzword, but as a human necessity. He invested in people, not just properties. Elena, as the lead architect of the Haven Center, became one of the most respected and innovative designers in the city, her work a testament to the power of building with empathy. Leo and Luna blossomed. They had a father who was present, and a brilliant, kind woman who showed them how to mend broken things, whether it was a scraped knee, a muddy teddy bear, or a fractured heart. Sometimes, late at night, after the kids were asleep, Alexander and Elena would sit together and talk. They talked about his lies and her pain, acknowledging the scars they both carried. They understood that their beginning was not something to be forgotten, but something to be remembered, a powerful, painful reminder of the importance of truth and the courage it takes to be vulnerable. Some might say their meeting in the park was fate, a collision of 2 lonely souls destined to find each other. Others might call it a series of choices, a testament to the human capacity for error, forgiveness, and redemption. Perhaps the truth, like their love story, is somewhere in between. It is a story that reminds us that our deepest wounds can sometimes lead us to our greatest strengths, and that the most valuable things in life are not the ones we own, but the ones we have the courage to build, to mend, and to earn. What do you think? Was this a story about destiny, or about the difficult choices we make every day? Let us know in the comments below. And if stories like this, about the messy, complicated, and beautiful nature of human connection move you, be sure to subscribe for many more to come.